PhD from University of Pittsburgh, 87. Significant impact in what the Department of Philosophy is doing now. Richard is mostly, he's approach to science, interdisciplinary. He really brought that department to a new level. Math, statistics, brain science, medical ethics, and psychology. It's one of the best departments on campus. And when they started the search for dean, he doesn't know that I was really only one candidate. So Richard took over as dean of the Humanities and Social Sciences School, which was named after what's the first name? Dietrich. Professor Scheines has visited at Berkeley, UCLA, University of Groningen, numerous awards, for example, the Steve Klepper on the Casualty in Statistics Education Award in 2013.
Causality.
The what?
Causality.
Causality, I'm sorry. Causality in Statistics and Education. And then Best Paper Award 2013, 6th International Workshop on Educational Data Mining. Distinguished record, many books, many papers. I will not go through these. You can access this on our web pages. It's a pleasure to introduce you to the speaker today in Richard Scheines.
Thank you. How's that volume? Is that good? Can you hear me back there? Thank you so much for having me, and the hospitality has been wonderful. I was last here in 2006, so it's astonishing. The changes, the new building, the university has really come of age. It's great to see. So thank you for having me and allowing me to talk. So I'm going to talk to you for about a half hour on a new initiative at Carnegie Mellon that's very exciting for me, and I think for many of the faculty, and really originated with our Nobel laureate, Herb Simon, who in the 1980s decided that the faculty who were basically going into their classrooms as individual faculty members and teaching in the ways they had traditionally taught could do much better by gathering and applying their research minds collaboratively to how we actually can teach effectively, what's going on in the students' minds when they learn, and what's going on in our teaching to help them learn in a much more systematic, scientific way. So he really invoked the faculty to gather themselves and apply their research minds to learning and to teaching as a science in and of itself. And they responded and did so. And there's been this wonderful tradition of what we call learning science at Carnegie Mellon. So the picture on the top is of Alan Newell, who is a computer scientist, and Herb Simon. The two of them collaborated routinely and very, very productively. And from their work, there's sprung many, many other pieces of very important work. On the left, Marshall Lovett, who's been doing learning science and statistics education for many years, and is now the director of our Teaching and Learning Center. Candace Till and Norman Beer have directed this Open Learning Initiative, which is an online platform for applying cognitive psychology to online courses. Dave Clark in the psychology department has done marvelous research on how children develop scientific understanding and scientific knowledge. And John Anderson in psychology back in the 1980s applied the perspective of building computational models of cognition to model how people actually think, how people represent, and how people learn. And one of his students, Ken Kadinger, who's now in the Human Computer Interaction Institute, alongside with John, took some of the computational models and used them to build intelligent tutors on the computer that would allow students a learning environment within which they could do algebra problems, geometry problems, computer programming problems, and many other fields as well. And that has sprung a whole field off, which we now call the field of cognitive tutors. And they were so successful in the 1990s that there was a spin-off company created called Carnegie Learning. And Carnegie Learning is now offering algebra curriculum and help in over 6,000 high schools across the United States. And the curriculum has been demonstrably effective. There's been many, many studies, and I'll get more to that in a few minutes. But this approach to using our best computational models of cognition and then applying those to building tutors for the students has proved to be, I think, really wildly successful. There's many, many areas of current research going on besides these areas. There's been this wonderful merging of data mining and machine learning to the kind of data one gets from educational applications when students take online courses or when they use these tutors. There's lots of data, right? We can record what they do, when they do it, how long they take, when they're struggling, when they're actually getting it, et cetera, and record all these data in a big log database, and then apply machine learning techniques to analyze these data, try to understand what is it the students are doing that's working, right? What's beneficial, what's not beneficial, and get deeper down into what's really happening under the hood when people learn. There's a large field now happening called computer-supported collaborative learning, where we have, right, the computer help us form groups, and the students work together and work with professors remotely to learn. There's another field that's happening that's very exciting called educational games, right? I'm sure many of you, especially the students, know all about gaming, right? You've played games, and I was on a tour yesterday, and I saw in one of the lounges many of the students playing games, and they look really fun, but not educational. But there's a field now that's arising, which is how do we take what we're beginning to understand about learning and how to teach it with the computer, and what we think, right, we know about how to make games that are engaging and fun, and bring them together so we can make learning fun and engaging, but still effective. And there's a large number of people looking at the neural basis for learning, what's actually happening in the physiology in the brain, etc. So there's a really large amount of really interesting research going on in this area all over the map. When the president of Carnegie Mellon, Subra Suresh, arrived in 2013 or so, and was looking around campus to see, what were the big areas of strength and what we could do to plant our flags in the ground and create initiatives that he would fund and support, he came across this wonderful tradition of learning science and decided to help us pivot really from learning science research to applying the learning science research to actually improving education. So there's been a lot of work, as I've described, in how, right, we think we can improve learning and what is going on in order to do that. And now the pivot is to try to do this on a much bigger scale to help many, many more students, many more professors apply these ideas to what's happening in the educational realm. So that's what's happening as the basis for the Simon Initiative. It's a pivot from research to application. And the vision that really underlies the whole initiative is this cycle that's what really is the basis of what I'm calling learning engineering. And on the left, we have our theories of learning. We have these models of what's happening in the brain when learning happens. And on the right, we have what's in the classroom or what's on the computer or what's in discussion or any context in which education is happening. And the idea is to make contact between the theory and the practice, and the theory being scientific and the practice being messy, right, when they combine and they have this cycle. So the theory informs the practice, and then data from the practice informs the theory, and we go around. That's what I think of as engineering. Right? And what we believe now is that when we actually set this up in the right way, that cycle causes improvement in learning and improvement in the theories of learning that we think we have now. So the mission for the initiative at Carnegie Mellon is to build an ecosystem, right, that will support this vision. So we have the technology and the human support necessary, right, to implement these theories of learning into actual practice, and to have the infrastructure in place to collect data from what's happening in the classroom to inform our best theories of learning. And globally, to make these tools much more accessible and much more usable by anybody, any institution that wants to actually apply some of this research and improve their own educational missions. So what is the Simon approach? What is learning engineering? So the first idea is that we want to make what's happening in the mind when learning takes place something we can model, right? Not just this abstract, very, very mysterious black box. We want it to be something we have a model of. So now I've replaced the question mark with little squares and triangles, and that's meant to represent to you that I have some idea or some model of what's in the head and what's actually representing a domain of expertise. Be it algebra, be it language, be it science and engineering, what have you. And when we actually bring the model in contact with practice, we start out with a simple model, and we actually use that model to design practice that the students will engage in. And then we, as I said, collect data, and the data will allow us to refine, improve, elaborate our model of what's happening in the student's mind. How does that actually affect how we design courses? Well, once we have a model of what's happening in learning and a model of how the student is going to represent the knowledge we're trying to impart, then that breaks down into some set of skills, some set of sub-skills, simply put, and then we have to make a mapping that connects that breakdown of the expertise to the things we want the students to do, which range from activities, watching videos, reading, engaging in homework, to assessments that actually tell us if the students are getting it or not, right? So we make these connections. Particular activities connect to particular skills, to particular subcomponents of the expertise. And then if this is what we've built, you can see that there's several skills that have no assessment, and there's several activities that have no connection to the skill either. So when we complete the model and we make the connection between each of the skills we want to teach and each of the activities and assessments to complete the picture, we know we are going to have a more effective course. So the model of expertise mediates everything. So we have this set of theories of learning, and we have this practice we want to actually engage the student in, and we use the theories of learning to build the model. We use the model to actually inform practice, and we collect data from the practice to improve the model of expertise, and the model of expertise, right, to improve our theories of learning. So this is really the same virtuous cycle, but now I'm mediating those two things with a model of expertise. So many people ask me, well, what is a model of expertise? It's an abstract idea. Well, I'll try to give you a more concrete sense of it so you can get something that illustrates the feel of it. So all of us learned how to actually multiply and divide and add fractions, right? How many of you hate adding fractions and dividing fractions? Still, I do, right? Well, very, very few of you, so you're eager fraction multipliers than I am. But if I asked you to sit down and map out what are the components of skill you'd have to impart to a second grader or a third grader or a fourth grader who was learning fractions, you'd probably be able to do something that was this simple, right? So to add fractions, you have to convert them to a common denominator. That's a skill you have to master in order to add two fractions. You don't have to do that for multiplying. You do not have to do that for dividing. And each of those things, right, can be broken down further and elaborated in more detail. And one thing I should say about this whole field in general is that when people sit down and intuitively come up with a model of what they think, right, is required for expertise for a domain, right, we often discover from the data and from the student's experience that we've left out many of the different skills. We have a blind spot as experts, right, to what really is required to master and perform skills in a particular domain. And there's many, many cases now to illustrate that fact. And it's very interesting how difficult it is to introspect, even with a group of people who are experts in a domain, and be able to write down all the skills that we have to impart to students for them to move from being novices to becoming experts. So that's part of this whole picture that I'm not going to cover, but it's a fascinating part in and of itself. Well, you can have a simple model like I've shown here. You can also have a very complicated model of expertise and how expertise changes. And these pictures represent hidden Markov models where the state of knowledge in the student's brain is represented as an unmeasured variable, but it's out there. And then we have these measured variables that you get to observe, things like performance on questions, performance on exams. And from the performance on exams and questions, we can infer, right, what the state of your knowledge is underneath the hood, so to speak. Okay, so again, right, in a simple domain like fractions, one of the activities we would have to engage upon or in to make this effective is to connect the activities and the assessments to the skills. So if I have a video that the students are watching to teach them how to divide fractions, right, that connects that video to that skill. And if we have an interactive tutor that has practice in multiplication of fractions, that connects them to the multiplication. And the quiz down here is all multiplication. And you can see right away that this is the only activities and assessments I've built. I've left out any activities or assessments that deal with adding fractions, right? So it turns out that when you have a full course, right, it's very difficult to align all the skills with all the activities and all the assessments. Just doing that turns out to be extremely important in engineering learning in a good way. Okay, so what is learning engineering as I've actually described it? Well, the first part of it is build an explicit model of what's happening in the head of the student. What is the expertise to be conveyed? What is happening when the student's set of expertises or not, when they move from one state of knowledge to another? Use the model to design highly interactive, and I'll get more to that in a few minutes. It turns out to be very important, right, to actually engage the student in interactive doing style exercises as opposed to just passive, right, hearing lectures like what I'm doing now, right? Very unoptimal for learning. My apologies, but I didn't want to have you work too hard. Use the model to design interactive exercises and instrument them so we get data on what's happening with the students. That's another key part of the entire picture. Third, collect the data on the student outcomes and assessments and activities, behaviors, and then use that data to help the student understand what they're doing that's helping them, to help the instructor understand what's working in the course and what's not, to help the course designer improve the course, and to help the learning scientists refine their theories of what it is that actually helps people learn. So we really have all four of those targets in mind when we collect data, and the way we analyze the data, and the way we visualize the data, and the way the data is displayed, right, is different for each of those audiences, and importantly so. And then use the data that we've gathered to iteratively improve, right, not only the things we provide to the students, but iteratively improve the model of expertise, right? So we start out, as I said, with sometimes a very simple model. As we collect data, we can elaborate that and make it more sophisticated and more responsive to what's actually observed. And that actually helps learning, and we know it does. We've done now several experiments in which we've improved the model of expertise from the data, used that improved model to build different activities, and then shown that those activities actually result in more learning. Improve the learning activities, of course, and improve the assessments as well. So the idea of iteration is completely crucial. It's never high likelihood that you'll create something that the students actually engage in that works on the first time perfectly. Right? You have to iterate to success. And collecting the right data and finding out where to iterate is just as important as using the theories in the beginning. And then use that data to actually improve our understanding of human learning. So this is really what I mean when I say learning engineering. It's really combining the science and the practice through the data collection. Okay, why do we think this works? Well, we have this very large body now of experimental evidence that's just dramatic in what it's shown. We have built, with these principles and these techniques, an entire course on Intro to Statistics, which is available here if you want it. And we use it at Carnegie Mellon and many, many, many other places across the United States, globally. And we've done many experiments, each of which show that not only do students learn more from that course than regular students in a lecture, but they can do it in half the time. So we know we have dramatic improvement both in learning and in the time for learning in the Intro to Stats course. For the algebra curriculum that I talked about that was in high schools across the US, the RAND Corporation, an independent entity, did an assessment of 140 different schools across the United States, half of which use this curriculum and half of which do not. And what they found is that the students are learning almost a year of extra material by using the curriculum that was built with these learning engineering principles. I'll get in a few minutes to this course that we compared with a MOOC style and the interactive style learning engineering approach that's OLI. And we have dozens of other examples. Intro to Biology, we have a nice experiment at UC Davis. We've done this in Humanities as well. We have a philosophy and we have a writing course that use argument diagramming according to these principles. Wilfred Zieg, who's in the philosophy department, a colleague of mine, he's been over here and taught here for a semester twice, and he's used that time partly to refine and develop this online course in logic. That's proven to be effective as well. We've done Chinese, we've done French, we're doing Spanish. Many, many languages are susceptible to this, and there's many, many other examples to boot. So the approach I've described is not necessarily connected to technology, but it's helped by technology. And the reason mostly is because using technology allows easy data collection. It's not necessary, and it's not necessary to use technology in any of this. But when you do use technology, it makes collecting data and analyzing data much more efficient and much more powerful. So to do that, you have to actually do a little bit more, and we've broken this into 4 stages. And the first stage is you have to actually apply these theories and build the instructional design into the materials that you want the students to actually use. So we call that stage the instructional design stage. And then once you've designed it, you have to actually author the exercises or author the activities, either in technology or in paper or in just discourse. And then you have to deliver that material to the students, and when you deliver it to the students, you have to do data collection. That's when you actually find out what's working and what's not. And then you have to analyze the data, and then you complete the loop by using the data analysis to refine your instructional design and go through the cycle iteratively. So we've broken things up into these 4 stages. There's nothing magical about that. We have a center for teaching and learning at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh called the Eberly Center, which now has a staff that's trained in instructional design in these ways and available to consult with the faculty who want to use this approach. We have very little in the way of authoring to help you build these modules, and one of the projects we're actually trying to get really, really ramped up right now is to provide a set of authoring tools for online modules, online technology, that will be usable by anybody. And I'll get back to that in a few minutes as well. The Open Learning Initiative is a platform for delivering modules that you've authored to the students that will also collect the data. And then we have this wonderful project called Data Lab, which is a data repository, a warehouse, if you will. It now holds over 700 data sets that record anything from high school algebra to fractions among 3rd and 4th and 5th graders, to high school physics, to college French, to college Spanish, to college logic, etc. And then we have a series of tools which are sophisticated ways to analyze these data to find what's going on under the hood, what's causing learning, what's just associated with learning but not causing it. The LFA is called Learning Factors Analysis. That's a set of techniques that help you refine the model of expertise from student data, with learning curves. The Open Learning Initiative, is, I think, the platform that we've applied and done research on these techniques, and it's now been used or is now offering about 35 or 40 different courses online, and almost every one of these courses is freely open, to anybody who wants to take them without getting credit, and also available to use in college courses for credit. So under the hood in the OLI platform, in the way we implement learning engineering, is this thing called a learning dashboard. So as I said before, if you break the domain into several sub-skills, and you list those skills in some kind of a model behind the scenes, which I'm not showing, and then you attach the various activities you give to the students in questions and activities and readings, etc., to these sub-skills in the model, you can then drill down and find out what skills are being appropriately learned and what skills are not. So if you look on the left here, these give a representation of whether the students in the class overall are learning these or whether they're not. The green represents good, they've learned it. The red is no, they have not, and the yellow is we're not sure. So the top skill is quite good, and if you look under the hood, you can see a distribution, of all the students, and the ones in green here, have done very well, and the ones in yellow we're not sure, and again, the ones in red we're sure are not. And then you can go down a level further and say, in terms of the sub-skill, what's happening. So in this case, it was in a stats course, and you had 2 variables, and you were looking at the relationship between those variables. right, like gender and income. And you had to do things like identify what are the relevant variables, classify their roles in the analysis, classify the type of variable, et cetera. And this will tell you things like, from all the sub-skills you've observed, which ones the students are having real trouble with. So this says classify the variable's role. So you have to identify one variable as the explanatory variable and one variable as the response or to be explained variable. Well, it turns out that professors don't even consider that a skill when they first come to this domain. It turns out the students have a lot of difficulty with this, and we've figured out that we really have to teach it explicitly. In doing so, we've improved things quite a lot. So that's an important fact. OLI has now been used by about 45,000 students a year, and is growing, as you can see. Okay, so how many of you have heard of MOOCs, right? Massively open online courses, right? So how does this all connect to what I'm talking about here? Well, there's this humongous growth in MOOCs over the last several years, right? You can take them mostly for free, and now there's a movement afoot where if you pay $50 or something akin to that, you can get a certificate that, right, lists you completed some course, and you can offer that as evidence to an employer that you've done something that was worthy of employing you from. So this is the growth in the number of courses that are started up or offered as MOOCs, where there were almost none in the beginning of 2012. Now there are almost 2,500. Probably there are more like 3,000 today. And there's three main providers, Coursera, edX, and Udacity. And the market analysis shows that Coursera is really the dominant provider of MOOCs. They have over a third of the market. edX has about a sixth, and the rest are spread out in a variety of ways. So Coursera really has taken over along with edX in this space. Now, there's a lot of pros for MOOCs, and I don't want to have anything to do with trashing them because they're very worthy in a certain way. They provide an incredible access to people all over the world who want to learn these subjects who are curious. Right? And they disseminate extremely effectively, so they're well marketed and they're available anywhere on the planet that has the internet. And they're really effective for marketing yourselves as a university if you want to offer a course and be known for that course as one of your strengths. What are the cons? Well, you might have heard that even though sometimes hundreds of thousands of people begin a MOOC, very, very few finish. The average completion rate is under 5%. It's about 4.2% now. Very, very small. And why is that? Because most people who sign up are just curious, but they have another life, and they're not doing this for a degree. And as time goes on, and they get busy, and then the MOOC is going by them, they're like, oh, enough. I'll go back to my life. And I learned the first 3 weeks. It was really fun. And that's just the way it is naturally. So they're also not really designed to produce learning outcomes. They're basically finding the professors who are good lecturers, who are engaging and who are well known in their field for how they teach, and they're recording their lectures in good quality video and interspersing that with some small amounts of interactive activities. And they don't really support instructional design in the ways that I've been talking about before. So what we think differentiates Carnegie Mellon's approach, learning engineering approach, is that we are applying learning science and cognitive theory. We're doing data analysis via the theory, and not just data analysis of the type, how many seconds did each person watch the video, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's really learning outcome driven. So the focus for us is not on the fancy lecture, not on the fancy production values, is did the students learn anything? So here's a study we did comparing the OLI learning engineering approach to a regular MOOC on introductory psychology. So we combined with Georgia Tech on this experiment, and what you can see on the top graph shows the retention of the students week by week. So the red is the OLI learning engineering approach, right? Same material, right? Offered just with different kinds of activities. And the green is the retention rate for the usual Coursera MOOC in Intro to Psychology. So you can see that even after, right, the first week, right, only 30% of students, right, got the guts up to take the first quiz. So they lost 70% of the students in week one, right? Quiz, no thanks. Right? But by the time that the course was over, right, they had under 5% of the students left, about 4.5%. The OLI students right, the retention was practically double, reliably over the course of the semester. And I won't go into the results, but the students who were in the OLI approach learned almost double as much as the Coursera MOOC students. But what I want to point to you that's so interesting to me from this set of results is when we did an analysis with some of the tools I'm describing, under the hood of what was happening about what made the students actually learn and what did not make them learn. So what happens when you take a course like Intro to Psychology online, either through Coursera or OLI? Well, some of the material you have to just read or watch videos about. It has to be presented to you. And then some of the material, right, you actually do exercises, you do activities, you do homework, or you take a test. So some of it's interactive and some of it's passive. The passive can be either reading or watching videos. We measured how many minutes the students spent just reading, and we measured how many minutes the students spent doing interactive exercises, and we measured how many minutes they spent passively watching videos. Now, most of the students don't watch the whole video. They watch some chunk of it, and then they say, I've got it, and they move on, or they're bored for whatever reason. And this graph, although it's a little difficult to understand, is what's called a causal graph. And it's, it's done by a program I won't go into either, but it tries to infer what's the plausible causal structure that might be generating the data we observed. And if you believe the causal structure of it, which I would take with a grain of salt, right? But what these little numbers and the edges mean is the strength of the causal connection. And what this shows is that the amount of minutes you spent just reading has a coefficient of 0.06. The amount you spent watching videos has a coefficient of almost the same 0.06. But the amount of minutes you spend doing interactive exercise is 0.44. The amount of minutes spent doing is 6 times more important in learning than watching or reading. Right? I mean, that's not a huge surprise, but this is the data actually supports it. Okay, so what are the next steps for us, right, in implementing and improving this approach? Well, what we are trying to do at Carnegie Mellon, right, in Pittsburgh for sure, and hopefully here as well, is take this approach and provide central resources to go after some CMU educational centerpieces and to show the world how this, right, will actually improve things and we can demonstrate it. And the first one is writing and communicating, right? So we teach writing to everybody who comes to Carnegie Mellon, right? Usually it's a one-semester course, and then I have many, many students who have come into my office and told me, and they tell the advisors that after they finish their one semester of writing, they do everything they possibly can to avoid all writing in the future, right? So they ask, does this course have writing? And if the answer is yes, they say, okay, I won't take that. What's that? What about this course? Minimize the writing. Well, that might be what you want to do as a student, but it doesn't seem to be adaptive to actually teaching the students how to write. We all believe that learning how to write and communicate and analyze things effectively is an ongoing process that takes more than one semester. It takes many years, sometimes a lifetime. Right? I don't think I consider myself a decent writer until I was somewhere in my late 30s. And now that's fading, so I only had about a decade, maybe 2. Statistics, as I showed you before, we have this wonderful Intro to Statistics course. What we want to do now is expand this into intermediate and advanced statistical methods and build modules that we know are effective that can be used in any part of the curriculum, right, that's involving statistical reasoning and methods, which is quite ubiquitous. And then we have an Intro to Carnegie Computer Science course that's being developed with these techniques at Carnegie Mellon. So centerpiece educational courses. And then we want to build the infrastructure that will support the faculty, the departments, the colleges who want to take this approach in doing the instructional design, in collecting the data, building the modules, and iterating to success. And so to do this, we need both internally and externally to build some tools and to build some support. The tools really divide into 2 kinds of tools. One kind we think are helpful to learning scientists, and the other are helpful to everybody. And what do you need for learning science? Well, there's many, many different types of tools, some of which I showed you brief little snippets of. I won't go into any of these, right? For these tools to work together effectively, there needs to be a backbone, right, that allows them to talk to each other and allows new tools to be plugged in and talk to each other in a very integrated, systemic way. So our intent is to take all these tools, which represent almost $80 million of funding from the US government and other places to develop these things and prove their effectiveness, right, and to open source them and to build a backbone so they can all actually talk to each other. So hopefully this will be a very, very high impact, worldwide project to deliver these tools and make them available to everybody out there who wants them. And then the second piece is really to build a toolkit that will help everybody, right, whether they're the most minimally trained teacher or the most maximally trained learning scientist, to build these kind of materials that take this approach. So we want to provide end-to-end support. We want the tools to be easy to use. And as I was telling someone yesterday, there needs to be a gentle on-ramp. So right now, if you want to use these tools, you have to spend several months learning them. You have to spend some money hiring someone technical to use them. It's quite a steep ramp to get going. We want to change that so that the ramp is extremely gentle, so that if you want, you can do something really interesting and simple in a day. Right? 1 day of training, 1 day of work, and you can do something to actually get going. And then get some data, and then see if it works. And then go on that cycle and iterate, and as time goes on, get more sophisticated, get more elaborate, but you can start very, very simple without a high barrier to entry. We know that's very important for this to be used. And then we really want to support iteration. Many of these courses or these modules get funded, right? The professor develops it, they put it out to the students, right? They use it, funding's over, they go back to their usual life, and it sort of sits there and doesn't really improve. We know that doesn't work as well as it could if you instead fund 3 different cycles of iteration. So they're out there, there's data, they improve it, data, improve it. Usually by the 3rd time, right, you get to a state where it's demonstrably effective. And then our priorities are in the OLI, for anybody who have used those or see those, is to really provide WYSIWYG authoring. If you don't know that acronym, that's what you see is what you get. Right? And then to help people do data extraction, so that's trivial to do and very easy to use. Data analysis support as well. So we know that we have to provide these tools and not provide the courses because we know that context varies locally, and so iteration has to be local. Right? Everybody knows their own students much better than we do, and they're very different, and they have different needs. And it turns out that really to develop these things effectively, the content we are doing has to be shared. So we have partnerships we're forming. You have the Pittsburgh Council on Higher Education. There's many, many universities in Pittsburgh. They're now gathering to actually collaborate on some of these projects, not only to build the tools, but to build some of the content. We have some domestic partners. We have some international partners. And basically, our goal is to really take the Carnegie Mellon learning science approach and to become the leader in applying this to transform education. So I'll stop there. Thank you. And you'll notice that the picture of Doha is just as impressive as downtown Pittsburgh, if not more so.
It's an odd-colored sausage.
Yeah, it's an odd-colored sausage, yeah. That yellow building. What is the yellow building?
Sorry?
What is the yellow building in the middle of Doha? I don't know. That's what?
Gasper, you should know what's the yellow building.
I have no idea.
Where is your PhD from? Where is your PhD from?
Carnegie Mellon.
It's the Doha Tower?
So, Richard, the comparisons of OLI and MOOC assumes that the subjects are similar. Is that actually true?
Yes, the subject.
There's no self-selection in these.
No, the subject were randomized. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It'd be great to see some of these tools applied here. You have different components for, I'll call them standard learners versus at-risk learners. Like you have saw those 2 distributions even in your performance.
In the dashboard, right.
Yeah, that red peak. You know, what do you do with that performance peak?
Well, I think
So
that
I think you can move the standard distribution to the right, like most learners improve, but then the at-risk learners are getting pumped.
yes, I think that's a great question, because what this tool has enabled us to do is quickly discover with many, many mechanisms, not just this visual one, but more sophisticated kind of predictive analytics, who's the at-risk student, and then deploy, right, a bigger set of resources to helping them, either with human support, more technological support, more time, more remedial help if they need it, et cetera, et cetera.
Maybe on the right, if my interpreting correctly, that red bar is sort of like what makes them at-risk, or is that not the right way to do that?
No, that's more which are the concepts or the skills, right, or everybody in the class generally having problems with. But you're absolutely right. So the red, right, if I click on one of those dots, I can see that particular student and which questions they've attempted, which questions they've had difficulty with. And so it's extremely useful, having done this as a professor, knowing exactly which students are at risk and then being more aggressive in, you know, having them come in for more help, et cetera, et cetera.
Thanks for the great talk. I wanted to ask you about that complex slide where you were looking at the coefficients of the impact of reading versus video versus do it yourself. Yeah. Is that just measuring the impact of the categories, or is it denormalized with time? So
It's category normalization. So we've not looked at it over time. This is a cross-section of the data after the semester's over.
so what you're saying is do it yourself is 6 times better than reading or watching video, but this could have been that I spent 1 hour doing videos, but 6 hours working by myself.
Right. Well, it's not working yourself, it's doing something interactive.
Sure, but the time is not a factor in that. Like I can watch a video for 20 minutes, but the interactive part can take me 3 hours.
Yes.
And then I don't know now if it's as surprising that it's 6 times better.
Well, I think the idea is that if you had only a certain number of minutes to devote, and I said to you, where do you want to put them, right? You could put some of them in watching, some of them in reading, and some of them in doing, right? It's usual for people to choose passive watching. Video watching is very popular, right? Even though people actually don't watch it very long without getting bored and leaving it. But it turns out that when students do, and they're interacting, right, they're learning a lot more per minute than when they're per minute.
That's what.
So this is per minute.
So this is per minute.
Yes, it's normalized.
Sorry. Okay, thanks for the presentation. Question I have with the cognitive tutors. Do you take them to the next step, and this is a higher level of interaction, such that from the tutor you throw that into a group setting where the individuals are making decisions, like in the market, financial market, so that you get that sort of discipline of the group then to enhance the level of, or to take the level of learning up one step. So you're actually making a decision on what you've learned in the cognitive tutor.
I'm not quite sure how to answer that. So I don't know of any work on cognitive tutors that's looked at group cognition or group decisions. But I don't see why it couldn't be done. Right? I think that would be interesting to discover, you know, what ways the group could actually come to a consensus, right, about what's happening. So I don't think there's any work been done in that area yet. Okay, there's a project for you.
One anything?
The one question I have on data collection. You see, when we do exam quizzes, if it's a mass, if it's a simple answer number, then it's very, very, you can analyze it very easy. But what if it's a short essay? What's your suggestion if the answers is a short essay? Like,
That's a great question. So, I mean, anybody who's done this knows that if you want to actually collect data on multiple choice questions or true false answers, it's simple and very easy. And if you want to have the students write essays or do free-form math solutions, for example, it's quite difficult. So I think one of the most exciting research areas is exactly in this. This dance, right, and a CTAT, SimStudent, AutoLab, these are all tools, right, that are involving some natural language processing to do answer, you know, categorization or answer recognition that are short answer or free form. So I don't think it's safe to say, I don't think it's fair to say that there's a series of off-the-shelf tools ready to go in this domain, but they're close. Now, I do think this is going to be the next big frontier, because we also know that there's different kinds of interactivity. Right? Even multiple choice is better than nothing for sure, but the real key comes when you're doing interesting interactive exercises, especially in groups like market analysis or other kinds of problem solving. And so what we're discovering is that the tools for natural language analysis are improving very rapidly and are quickly getting to the point where they're going to be, right, I think, transformative in how we actually do this. It's AI. I mean, I'll give you an anecdote. There's a few researchers out west who looked at bulletin board postings on an intro to biology class and tried to predict from the bulletin board postings what the final exam score would be. It was a 12-week course, and after the 3rd week, they could predict it within about 5 points from nothing else than just the bulletin board postings. By the 5th week, they could predict it within 2 points. That's a little scary. Now, what they were doing to do the prediction was such a messy black box that using that to actually provide instruction, right, is not there yet. But the fact that they're analyzing the language and using semantic concepts and using biological concepts, and not just syntax and word length and things like that, shows that that's big progress is happening there. And we need to have better automatic response to free-form dialogue, free-form math questions, etc.
Within the Simon Initiative, is there a part dedicated to the science of teaching?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I'm asking that is that it still happens quite often that you get like a fresh PhD who is appointed to a faculty position, thrown in a classroom and just improvises and learns on the go. Huh?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because I mean, I've been a department head now, I'm a dean, and so for me, having the faculty appropriately trained is one of the really challenging sort of things. I think there's many, many ways we can actually go in that. I think one way is the teaching track, right, which is, you know, the professorship here, and about 20 or 30% of it in Pittsburgh, I think have a special responsibility in a certain sense to become professionally educated about what works in teaching and what works in learning. And I think we can provide the means for that to happen. And I think certainly in a place like Carnegie Mellon, Pittsburgh, we can have the regular faculty, right, depend on them partly, right, to help them understand what are the techniques in teaching in their domain that we think work, and how to set things up so they're actually measuring data and taking it seriously, collaboratively. I think what's going to happen, at least in my experience, is that when you teach an individual course on the upper level that you give every 2 or 3 years, it's unlikely that you'll have the effort, right, to do this kind of a thing. But if it's an introductory course which is taught again and again and again by different people over different years, it's really worth the effort to instrument it properly, to make sure that everybody who's going to teach it year by year continues the same essential process. And if that involves faculty who are brand new, faculty who are already here, faculty who are trained, etc., they're all going to be part of a collaboration which hopefully elevates their level to more sophisticated, no matter what they're training. But we certainly need to provide more training opportunities as well. Yeah.
There's some interest, a lot of research right now about quick feedback loop learning and gamification of learning, which you mentioned at the beginning. Can you talk a little bit about the OLI initiative and the feedback to the learner, like when they're doing these activities as opposed to passively watching video or passively reading? What's the feedback the learner getting from, you know, inputting the answer to a question? Is it immediate? Does it only wait until the test? Can you talk about the impact of the feedback to the learner with this initiative and its success?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So the technology supports immediate feedback, although you don't have to use that if you don't want to as a professor. So the options for the multiple choice, for example, are for each particular choice that the student puts in, right, you can attach immediate feedback specific to that choice, right? If you're more sophisticated and you use something like CTAT, which is Cognitive Tutoring Authoring Toolkit, right, then the feedback you give the student immediately is going to be responsive not only to what they did, but what you think the skills are they have and what they don't have. So you can personalize the feedback very sophisticatedly. What we do know, what we think we know, is that immediate feedback is superior in terms of learning. So the sooner you're actually you're given feedback that's diagnostic and helpful to you, the better you're going to be off. But in terms of the technology of OLI, it supports it completely, but it's up to the professor who builds the course to use it. Some courses don't use it, some courses do. The ones that use it are more effective. I think we've really learned that for sure by now.
Thank you for the opportunity. I just want to know what are the processes or the technology that is used for an interactive model of pedagogy, something like, you know, online discussion forums, and what are the technologies that are used?
It's a good question. There's a million of them. So online discussion forums are one of them, and the professor can pose a question and set the students loose with an online discussion and then intervene and analyze it, etc. But most of the interactions, once they're above multiple choice or matching exercises or short answer things, right, have to be built with somewhat specific technology. So again, the CTAT, the Cognitive Tutoring Authoring Toolkit, allows you as a professor to build a highly interactive, right, sequential exercise where the student has to do a problem that involves multiple steps. And each step, right, can have its own feedback mechanism And it can do things, right, like give you specific feedback depending on what mathematical expression you typed in, if behind the scenes you've also employed, right, a math expression analyzer. The AutoLab program allows the computer science people to have students submit programs, and then the program gets to run, and then the response that we give to the student depends on what happened when the program was run. The program has to be compiled ahead of time and work, but then what it does on a variety of cases can be analyzed automatically, and the feedback can be given to the student. So that's fully interactive in the sense that you build something, you get feedback on it, as if the instructor was running the program. And every level in between. And I think this is a big area of research, right, where the kinds of interactivity that we think work person to person, right, person to professor, group to group, et cetera, et cetera. Some of them are easy to support, and some of them are very difficult to support intelligently. I mean, I think the other thing I didn't mention here, which I should retreat back to, is I think that the computer is very useful for certain things and very bad at others. And humans are very bad at some things and very good at others. And I think it turns out that giving the computer the job of having the students learn some basic skills, some basic ideas, and then giving the professor and the students the idea of applying those to interesting cases, to nuanced examples, that turns out to be a human thing, right? And I've taught subjects like logic often enough where it's so boring after the 15th time where you're teaching how the parentheses distribute. You're like, please, somebody else do that, right? But applying it to an interesting case study, that's endlessly fascinating. It's what we, I think, as professors and students find engaging and interesting. So I think there's another part of this that I haven't discussed, which is what parts of this process do you give to the computer, what parts do you not give to the computer? And that's a topic in and of itself.
Are these commercial products?
These are not commercial products. These are all academic products that we're going to make open source and freely available. Yes.
So I think I get the idea that learning is improved from going from reading to playing to interactivity. But the flip side of that is that the complexity and the cost of authoring goes through the roof. So these MOOC companies, to actually get from writing to publishing good videos, have all raised hundreds of millions of dollars just to actually get the authoring and the distribution right. So now we're looking at another level of sophistication in the authoring environment and the time and the distribution that comes with it. And I'm wondering if that, since we're talking about applying, how commercially viable something like that is.
No, it's a great question. There's lots of ways to answer that. So clearly there's an economy of scale, right? So, I mean, we were at Carnegie Mellon deciding, well, where are the topics that are worth investing the effort? Because as you say, it's not cheap to do interactivity. So we all got together on the statistics project, and we decided that a simple module on bivariate regression, right, is something that can be useful to literally every course on research methods across the entire curriculum. So we said, if that's going to be that widely usable, then the other schools that are in the Pittsburgh Collaborative are also going to use these things, then it's worth the effort, right? So I think part of the question, part of the answer depends upon how many contexts, how many places are going to use the interactivity you build. And if it's very, very specialized to only a few students, it's probably not worth the effort. And I don't think there's any way around what you say. It is effort, and the better the tools are, the less the effort will be, but it's never going to be, right, where it's trivial. I don't think that's in the future, at least in the near-term future. So given that it's not trivial, right, it's not trivial to make a good video either, right, but it's a whole lot easier to make a decent video than it is to make an interactive exercise. Now, it's often the case that once a base of technology exists in an area, like a simulation for markets or a market, right, program, then adding on to it so there's more interactivity is not so bad. So sometimes the initial investment, right, is expensive, and then it's easy to increment from there. Sometimes what makes it worthwhile is that lots of different classes at lots of different universities all face the same educational problem. And so for those basic skills that we really take to be fundamental to everybody learning in this domain, we really should be working together, right, and collaborating so we share each other's work. But I don't want to minimize that. You're absolutely right, and it's not the case, right, that building interactivity that's quite useful is trivial. It's not. Not easy.
One more question?
I'm the lucky one. Thanks for the talk. and rarely it happens that we definitely take something at home. So this is the one we are definitely taking something, because you are saying that to do activities are very important.
Yes.
So thanks for that one. I was wondering, you mentioned that something happens in neurons, that learning we can see physically. I was curious about that. I am not a biologist, so if you could explain that to a mathematician.
Well, do you know neural networks?
Little bit, yes.
So in learning in neural networks, you have different weighting, right, on the arcs, which happens by reinforcement learning, right? There's a biological analogy to that. So at the neuronal level, right, the synapses can change, and you know the sheathing can change, and so you have different ways to transmit the same signal in one path, reinforced, and transmitted over another, right, de-enforced, whatever the word is. So I think there's a lot of progress on that level in terms of what physiologically is changing in the neurons to help learning. I don't really know that field well, so don't take what I'm saying as worthwhile. But there is interesting work also going on a more macro level in which we're doing imaging of the brain. And we're seeing, if you look at the pattern of activations that happens in a student prior to learning a certain subject, and then the pattern of activation that happens after learning a subject, we can see very distinct differences now, right? So we can see concept formation happening in the neural imaging of it, right? I don't think we can explain what's going on under the hood for that, but we do see the differences in the technology. So I don't think we're very close to having the neural basis of learning connect to what I'm talking about in learning in the classroom. But we're not that far. You know, maybe it's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. It's not 50.
So just a comment added to that. So in future, there is a possibility that we will have this science fiction thing, that some electrode attached to the brain and then we know calculus. Just working.
Isn't that your hope? I've always wanted to, like, if I'm going to a place and I want to learn the language, if I wanted to learn Arabic, what would you like? You like somebody to give you a helmet, you put it on at night, and you go to sleep, and you wake up, and you know Arabic, right? That would be, that's not anytime soon. Sorry. Yes, I do. Jean Patrick Crecine. Yeah. Thank you so much.